Well, welcome back to Diverse Joy on this New Year's episode. It's a podcast that infuses science, practical skills, and most of all, joy into diversity discussions. My co-host is the sparkly and bespeckled Dr. William Cox.
And my co-host is the riveting, also sparkly, rhinestone bespectacled Dr. Amber Nelson. So for this January episode 6 of season 2, what's bringing you joy, Amber?
You know, one of my favorite things at the end of the year / beginning of the year is Spotify, actually. So this
is not branded content,
not sponsored. But I love.
But if you want
music.
to sponsor us, please.
Yeah, Spotify, hit us up. Hit us up. I love music. I play it constantly. I always have it going, even when I teach classes or I'm doing a presentation. Part of my kind of even decolonizing, which we talked about before, efforts is to play music and to change kind of the tone of a space of what you're expecting from a professional presentation or a course. So I'm listening to music constantly, and my music is super, super broad. I don't think that there might be one style of music that I'm not like super into, and that's like screamo. It scares me a little bit.
Screamo?
Screamo, yeah.
I've never even heard of this.
Really? It's like the really intense metal that like is kind of like screaming type. Yeah,
okay. I guess I know of that, just didn't know it was called that.
Yeah. Kind of screamo, heavy metal music. So anyway, I just really enjoy all types, from like Broadway musicals to classical to retro to rap to everything. And so at the end of the year, Spotify always does like a recap of your year, like how much music, like how many hours did you listen to? Who was your most played artist? And at what percentage were you of like the listeners of that artist, and what songs did you listen to on repeat? What days and months were your highest listened to days? And so it's a really fun like recap of the year, especially for me as somebody who really loves to listen to music and find it to see like what was my mood, like what was I into this year, because my taste kind of shifts and changes, and I'm so eclectic. It's just really fun to see what it came out to, like what it comes out to. So one of my years, it was like theater kid pop Disney or something weird like that. It was like this weird mix of like all these different types of genres, and it's really fun. I assume part of my like I have ADHD, and so I get hyperfixated on things sometimes, and so especially music or songs. So I will not be surprised if Please 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 by Sabrina Carpenter is on my most played songs. It might be on everybody's because it seems like it's being pushed a lot. But then also Texas Hold'em by Beyonce. I have had that song on repeat since it came out. So I imagine that those will be on my top played songs of the year.
So cool. Yeah, when talking about your eclectic music styles, so being someone who grew up moving all over the world, I feel like in those kind of formative years, like in high school, when I think a lot of people's music tastes get kind of firmed up a bit, like it's a very social kind of thing. I feel like I kind of missed that. In high school, I never had friends that I like where we like listened to music or followed a specific band or artist. And so when people ask like, oh, what kind of music do you listen to? I don't even know how to answer. Like movie soundtracks, TV show soundtracks are kind of my main thing. Star Wars soundtracks.
There's nothing wrong with that. But it is really interesting because like there's even research, and it's kind of tangential, but there's research around like nostalgia. So like a lot of the music that we listened to when we were teenagers is typically like the music that most people like go like link themselves to. That's the music that they like will always love, right? So boy bands for me, like Britney Spears and NSYNC and Backstreet Boys and 98 Degrees, like all of those bands, Spice Girls, like all of that during those formative years are really, really like nostalgic and dear to my heart. It will be something music that we'll always love. Any of the like
lovely.
early 2000s, 90s music is gonna be my thing.
So I don't do Spotify. I do Apple Music. They can also sponsor us if they want. But does that give you like a report or something that you can like share on social media? Is that how it works?
Spotify, yeah.
Spotify?
Yep. They give you like a little card, like pictures and like reels and things that you can share. Which is really cool.
So let's make a mental note. I'm looking towards our producer to make a note to help us remember. Like when those come out, because we're filming this just a little before January. Yep. When you get that, let's share them on our socials.
I'll share so you all can see what my music was like this year.
Yeah. Everyone should follow us on those socials at Diverse Joy on Instagram, X, and Threads. And there's a Diverse Joy page on Facebook that you can like and follow.
Yeah.
So,
and well, how about you? What is your joy this month?
So my joy for New Year's. Last New Year's, my friends and I and Eric Roman did a late all night party, like a party till dawn type situation. Because I guess the city laws or whatever that say when bars have to close are null and void on New Year's. Yeah. And we were kind of committed to doing the all nighter. So we
going all night.
We had our stimulants and we danced and danced and danced at a local gay club bar called Woofs, which we walked past the other day. You saw that? Yeah. And did their all night party. And I mean, it lasted until they brought in like a free brunch for everyone in the morning.
Wow. I love that.
And there were a few points where Roman wanted to go home, but then I was like, well, you wanted the brunch. He was like, oh, I do love some eggs.
I really wanted that brunch.
It's really committed.
But yeah, it was fun. And, when you have to dance all night, I'm saying like it's a punishment.
I have to dance all night.
But I don't. It's a different energy where I don't know. It was fun and cool. We had a wild and crazy New Year's.
That's so fun.
Usually with our joys, we like share a picture when the episode comes out, but I'm pretty sure the pictures of us are like pretty awful.
As you're dancing all night,
we probably look pretty messed up. So we'll see. We'll see if we let the video.
Yeah, that's
people
hilarious.
See that.
No, it reminds me that one of my, I'm sure, joys at some point is Family Matters, and there was an episode where they had like a all night dance competition, and so you had to like whoever stopped dancing like lost, right? So whoever stayed dancing the most, but yeah, they were looking rough, in the middle of the night
TV
too.
Shows. Gilmore Girls did that.
Oh, did they?
And Golden Girls had an episode with that, and we're talking about Golden Girls.
We're
gonna
talk about Golden Girls. Yep.
Yeah.
That's
so
great.
dance.
Well, that's so fun. I love that.
All right. So our main kind of discussion topic today, we are talking about kind of traditional beauty standards and related things like attractiveness bias, something called the halo effect.
Yep.
We'll explain what all these things mean. But generally, things tied to people's kind of physical appearance and physical features and biases and stereotypes that come from those things. And you were going to start us off. So take it away, Dr. Nelson.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's something that we all are impacted by, right? And depending on where you fall in the traditional ideas of beauty, you think about it more and less, right? And just like any bias, if you are the benefactor of it, you don't necessarily think about it, right? That kind of beauty privilege, I am, if you would like to use those words. And also recognizing that like the beauty standards have shifted and changed so much over time too, right? Like things that used to be not considered beautiful are now like what used to be that they curvaceous bodies and heavier set folks was the standard of beauty, and now that has shifted and changed, and it's yet shifted and changed again to a point where I think in the 90s and 2000s, again, like being millennials ourselves, growing up, that the standard of beauty had a very specific look, right? To what?
Very skinny.
Very skinny. And I mean, I'm thinking back to things like Rubenesque. Yes, thank you. Our producer reminded me. Rubenesque, that's the name, the kind of term for what it used to be for
curvy bodies
considered
the most beautiful.
Yes,
Rubenesque.
yes. And but yeah, in the 90s and 2000s, I'm remembering things like America's Next Top Model, and like what a plus size model was like a size 6, and that they were considered fat, and or even like again, as a millennial growing up watching a lot of Disney, and
those are definitely all skinny teens.
Yeah, but you know, again, as a Black teenager in the 2000s and 90s, that Raven Simone, right, was a really big like Black teenage actor on Disney, and she was always considered fat. And I look back at those pictures and I watch the shows and I'm like, she was never fat.
No,
like on the
Raven
Cheetah Girls,
like,
she was on the Cheetah Girls, all these things, and she was considered the plus size like fat girl, and like the normal one, or the one that, like, you know, I don't know. It was just an interesting, you know, and like those are those things like that, the influence of media and things like that.
And the fashion and beauty industry in general. So there was a season of Project Runway. I'm going to ask Roman to tell me what season of Project Runway, where, you know, for so many years, this very long running show. Okay, it was season 16. I thought it was season 16 actually, but thank you for confirming. You know, people are making clothes, and it's supposed to be about the fashion and about the clothes, but it's always the like size 0 models.
Right.
And then this one season, they were like, that's not okay anymore. And they had a huge range of sizes from like all different heights and very curvy and very, very traditionally. Eric Roman has corrected me. Their standard model size was size 4 originally. But they had this one season where, you know, you didn't know which model you were going to get, and you had to make your fashion work. They were trying to be very inclusive, and it's a really good season.
Ladies, come on out! Model 1 comes out, typical skinny, tall girl, and then Model 3 comes out with real curves, real body.
These girls, they have curves and butts and hips.
This season, you will be working with models of all sizes. These stunning women range in size from 2 to 22.
I'm super nervous, I'm scared.
I have to tell you, I'm very, very excited about this, because the truth of fashion is that one size does not fit all.
Correct.
And very successful designers must be able to design for all sizes.
I know you don't watch Project Runway.
I don't, but I mean, it's not that I don't like it. I just have never actually watched. I may have watched 1 or 2 seasons or episodes.
You have all these other trappings of like gay culture,
I know,
like
well,
all your love of drag queens and RuPaul's Drag Race, but not Project Runway.
I
What's that?
know. I have watched a couple episodes. I just haven't like gotten way into it.
I wasn't into it really until Roman and I got together, and he was always really into it, and introduced me to, and it's really interesting, and you learn a lot of things about fashion and dressing, but also it's a competition show, so you can enjoy it for that. Maybe I'll make it a recommendation sometime.
There we go. There we go.
But yeah, the season that they did the models of all sizes, you know, it was very interesting to see how like some of the designers reacted in weird ways, and others who like that was their bread and butter. They normally do quote unquote real women, like curvy women. And just seeing how it threw some people through a loop is like, well, what have you been doing all this time? Like your only ability is to make for size 4 people. Like, how are you even a clothing designer then?
Right. And it's like, you know, I think it's really interesting when, you know, I want to come back to like the larger picture of what attractiveness is too, but sticking with the weight or the size piece, that we are seeing this movement, and we talked about this last season around body positivity and size inclusiveness and size inclusion. And yet we still see like the average American woman is between a size 12 and a size 16, which by those standards is plus plus size. And you would think that most fashion labels or clothing brands would cater to those sizes, and they don't. And you would like,
especially
for me,
because capitalism.
Exactly.
Shouldn't they be trying to make money?
Going back to last episode where I kept saying pocketbook, but like when you think about your pocketbook, you want a fat pocketbook, you want a fat wallet, you want to make that money. You would think that you would try to do that. And it's really interesting, again, as a woman who embodies a larger body, that's a fat woman, that going shopping, I can't just buy clothes everywhere. And those places and those brands that say that they're size inclusive, or they have size inclusive sizes and ranges online, but don't carry them in stores. So like I can shop online, but then I have to wait until the clothes get shipped to me. Then I have to try them out. I have to send them back. And it's very hard for me to go shopping in person.
It's a form of what some people call a fat tax.
Right. Absolutely.
Extra effort and money if you have to like kind of pay for the shipping fees and don't get those funds back and stuff. Extra stuff that you have to do because you're a curvy lady.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, it's interesting when you say fat tax. A student of mine and I did a whole research study on the fat tax and the experiences of fat embodied folks, particularly in their experiences in work environments, which is a good segue because it's one of the things that came up was the perceived competence that people.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah,
just
sure.
One last thing on the capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
What are you trying to say?
Can you make it clear that you're not talking about an actual tax?
It's not an actual tax.
Because there's a different podcast that I listened to, and one of the hosts was talking about the pink tax.
Oh, right.
And the other host thought she meant an actual tax.
Right,
and I was like, girl, no.
No, not an actual tax. I mean, a tax meaning that like there's extra money associated with being fat, right?
Yeah. This idea of tax, it's not a literal tax that government has somehow levied.
It's actual fat tax.
It's just, it feels like a tax or it's extra work that they have to do because of how the world is set up, not because of a specific law levying a tax.
It costs more money to have things shipped to me and then having to ship them back versus somebody else that can just go into the store, or that it costs more money for my size of clothing versus somebody else in the exact same garment, right?
And with just one last thing on might not be the last thing, but on the capitalism, them not making the bigger sizes, it doesn't make sense from a capitalist perspective, from like aren't they trying to make money? But what it's saying is it's more important to them to have a certain image of what their customers look like. That's actually even more important than making money. Which, when we talk about capitalism and earlier we talked about colonialism as kind of a form of that, like, it causes a lot of problems and drives so many things. So for this kind of bias to kind of overpower even those kinds of concerns for some of these companies shows how intense and strong this motive is. Yeah.
And I'm not going to get into all of that, but there are a number of brands who were very explicit in that. So we
only do sizes 0, 1, and 2.
Right. I mean, like
that's a quote from Mean Girls.
but literally, like Abercrombie and Fitch was one back, especially in the 2000s. Lululemon has been, accused of some of those things and being very, very explicit in saying like, I don't want those types of bodies wearing my clothes, And so again, that there's just the exclusiveness that comes to that and reinforcing of what bodies deserve to be seen and shown, what bodies are worthy of love, what bodies are worthy of being accepted and seen as beautiful. And again, that's not just size or weight, I should say, but that goes to abilities and like limb differences and like appearance, height, all of that we have a very specific idea of what is considered beautiful and what's not. And like I was saying about the research that our study was called the fat tax. And one of the things that came up was even the perceived competence, right? That like being passed over for promotion and how people didn't perceive folks as competent depending on their attractiveness level or their weight, right? Yep. And does your weight make you more or less competent at your job? No, right?
But also it relates to other kinds of misperceptions and stereotypes related to weight. Like, oh, someone's bigger because they don't have self-control.
Right.
And they're like gluttonous.
Right.
When really that's not a very good,
well,
not a very realistic correlation or relationship.
Absolutely. Well, it becomes a morality issue than it is about somebody's...
Which is the halo effect that people who are more attractive are more good, more competent, more smart, more likable.
Absolutely. And I think about, so the halo effect is exactly that, right? Is this bias that says that the more attractive somebody is, the more they're equated with good, beautiful, all of the best attributes in life, right? And so that is like that. I like to call it the thirst trap, like the thirst trap effect. So like somebody that's beautiful is like all of a sudden you're kind of trapped and captured by them.
And you want to listen to them more. You want to look at them more.
Yeah, you want to look at them more. You want to listen. You have more willingness to accept things from them than you would from somebody else.
Like there's the idea, it's often a joke on sitcoms that attractive people don't get speeding tickets because they charm the officer to not give them a ticket.
Right. But I mean, I even think about like the show You on Netflix. I haven't
watched it, but I know of it.
Oh my gosh.
I know of it.
Oh my gosh. So, I mean, it's been out for a while. It's in the season. There's been at least 3 seasons, I think.
Something like that.
And it's about this guy who stalks women and it's got 4 seasons. Thank you. And it's Penn Badgley is the main character who's, very attractive. He is very hot. As
Eric Roman just said he's so hot in our little teleprompter. He's like, oh, he's hot.
He's so hot, right? But he like literally stalks women and will be, I mean, spoiler alert, but like he's pulled to like killing and doing all of these things. And but there's so much, he's given so much leeway because he's attractive, right? Like this guy that's just like showing up everywhere, is like standing outside your window, like you wouldn't think anything. If I saw that, I hope that even if he was attractive, I would say that is alarming, right? But we see this like, oh, this is a really attractive person. Oh, this isn't, I can see this as charming and not creepy, right? Yeah. Like, I always say that the line of whether or not you find an action or something creepy versus charming is whether or not you're attracted to that person. Yeah. And again, this idea that like we have a very specific idea of what is and isn't attractive, particularly in our culture.
Yeah. And you already said a little bit of this, but it relates to many different kinds of physical features as well. You mentioned height. And one thing is, people tend to think of if you're taller, you're more masculine, right? Both for women and for men. So women who are considered, quote, too tall, I'm not saying they're too tall, but people, they start being seen as more masculine. Oh, it must be so hard to be so tall. And, men must not want to date you as much, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And then men who are shorter are thought to be more feminine.
Right.
And so on. Mm-hmm. Also related to, then race adds a whole other bag of worms to it. Absolutely. So these kind of predominant beauty standards in the US are very Eurocentric, so very much related to white folks. So there's a term colorism, where even within a racial group, so say black women and men, kind of lighter skin is considered more attractive than having kind of being more dark skinned. Right. It's because it's approaching that kind of white beauty standard. There's also a lot of research on the types of features people have. So if you have more Afrocentric features, so it's kind of a wider nose, thicker lips, those are considered to be more Afrocentric kind of features. There's research showing that people see black folks like that as more criminal. Yeah. Not just less attractive, but actually think they're more likely to commit crimes, as though facial features somehow determine your criminal intentions or whatever, which is so ridiculous and so
And well, there's a lot of history to that, right? There was a lot of very specific propaganda that was created in order to criminalize and to make and demonize really dark skin and really, more Afrocentric features to cause fear and to cause people to, particularly white folks, to be afraid of that Black men and women were out to, hurt them. And this is where policing came in. There was a lot of things, but there was a lot of really specific propaganda that came out of that. And we also saw back in, slavery that like white lighter skinned folks were also ones that tended to be those that were in the house more, also may have been offspring of slave owners. And so like we see this disparity that happened early on, and it continues to get perpetuated in media as well, where we see often the portrayals are those that are lighter skinned, are the ones that are the business people, they're the CEOs, they're the more successful ones. Those that are darker skinned tend to be the ones that are the hoodlums, right? If I'm not going to use other words for, but like thugs and things like that, they're going to be the ones that are more criminalized. So it continues to be perpetuated and reinforced in all of our media portrayals as well.
And now we're going to take a little break. So one thing that just is occurring to me, but because we're filming, because we're recording. So for those of you who can see me, I'm wearing makeup. This is not something that I do every day. It's something you have to do on film because kind of redness and splotchiness in your face shows up when you're recording in HD like we are. And so before we started recording, we actually went and got kind of makeup for me. And it's, it was expensive. It was several things we would have to get. And this is on me just so that I don't look like I'm wearing makeup. Right. So it's like a foundation and a concealer and a powder and a, what's the spray thing called?
Setting spray.
Just so that we can film and I can look like I'm not wearing anything. Right. As opposed to what Amber has to wear as a woman, the eyeliner, mascara, lip stuff, things to make kind of colorful patterns like rosier cheeks and things. Mine is all just kind of trying to get all one color. Right. And I'm just like, not only do you have to do all of that, for the most part, you have to do that every day. Right. Or women are expected to kind of meet even just a minimum standard of beauty. Right. And I just think about how much money that all costs, how much money these companies make off of that. Yep. And, they're motivated to maintain that beauty standard because it keeps women buying this stuff. Right. Like they have no motivation to say, oh, less makeup is probably going to make you look prettier or more valuable or all these kinds of messages we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a really interesting experience because, again, there's this message around what is beautiful and natural. Your natural state is beautiful, but it has to be enhanced with makeup, right? And there's this whole move towards the clean girl look, and the clean girl look still requires makeup to look like you're not really wearing makeup. And also you need to make it so where you look like you have no pores, no blemishes, no wrinkles, right? And also aging is also part of this whole idea of beauty and beauty standards that your hair color, you as women in particular, there's a huge gender difference too around beauty standards and expectations and the things that women are typically women and femme presenting folks are expected to maintain and look like. Again, no wrinkles and no gray hairs. We can't look like our age. We can't, have anything wrong with us. And so we feed into the beauty industry and makeup and all of that. And the amount of money, I am pretty minimalist when it comes to my makeup. I do 5 to 10 minutes. I have 5 to 10, 5-ish, 6 products, maybe if I'm really trying to do something fancy, but I don't really know what I'm doing. So it never really turns out, but I try.
Because I genuinely don't know what I'm doing. Like each day when we're prepping for filming, you help me out. I think you know what you're doing a lot. Or maybe it's just, it's just the baseline for what just about any woman needs to know is so high that you don't consider it knowing a lot. But
maybe, Well, and again, like I would say that my level of knowledge is probably baseline or basic level. I can do my foundation. I do a primer now, which I never used to do, and get the sunscreen. I do a blush. I do a mascara and an eyeliner or an eyeshadow and a setting spray, and that's pretty much it. But there is a whole
You're
lot
saying
more.
that's it. Like that's not a lot of stuff.
I know
you have to do just to make your face presentable,
right? Or at least to feel like, right? Like whether or not it's accurate. And I try to push back on it, and that's partly why I try to keep my makeup fairly minimal. But
that doesn't sound minimal to me. But again, that's also kind of a male privilege, I guess, where people really don't expect me to do any of that, so I don't have to know about any
there
of it.
are others. Again, in my makeup routine takes me 5 to 10 minutes tops. And a lot of folks who wear makeup regularly, their like minimum routine is at least 30 minutes, if not longer. And people that do full glam, that's like an hour or more. Like it takes a lot of energy and effort to try to look and present a certain way.
That's 2%. If they take half an hour, that's 2% of their day.
I mean, and 30 minutes is a conservative. That's like not a very like extreme look. And so it just takes a lot. It takes a lot. And another part of the beauty industry, again, like that's also the age piece, that's the makeup. But it goes back to, we started to talk a little bit about the colorism and race in this as well. But we also see that the beauty industry, makeup industry, and things like that also drive our perceptions of what is and isn't beautiful. And we see that also reflected in the shades of foundation, shades of color that they offer.
And so off recording, you were telling me about a company that kind of had a pretty rude misstep related to darker skin colors.
And I think that a lot of companies, as they're expanding shades or sizes and different things, it does take, I will say this, it takes some time to get it right. But Youthforia was one that recently expanded to darker shades, and essentially they just put out black face paint. And the misstep there is, while again, we talk about intent and impact all the time. I think that the intent was like, how do we make a shade that's for very dark skin folks, which dark skin folks, and I'm not dark skin. For dark skin folks, it is hard. It is really hard to find a shade that works for them. They usually have to do a lot of mixing and doing things where they, it's still never quite right. So I think that the intent of this brand was to get a shade that's really works for really very, very dark skinned folks. But the miss was thinking that just because they're dark skinned, that there's no tone to their skin.
To clarify for people who aren't familiar with makeup, which includes myself, but I was hearing you talk about it.
Yeah.
So all makeup, it has complexity in the colors. It's not like, say, black spray paint, where it's just
white. Just because you're really, really pale does not mean that your skin is literally a white paint.
And so makeup has kind of textures to the color.
Absolutely.
But
and
for
undertones, overtones. Yes.
But for this one, they just made it kind of
it was
truly black the color, not black the skin color.
It was really practically black paint. And you'd see some beauty influencers trying it out, especially dark skinned folks who are like looking for dark shades. And they would paint half their face in black face paint or black paint, and then paint their other half of their face with this foundation, and there was virtually no difference.
It doesn't make it look like skin. It makes it look like our black microphones here.
Right, exactly. And what is that communicating, right? Whether that's the intent or not, the intent of the impact of not having a very diverse or large shade range, or thinking that like the darkest people are just flat black with no tonality.
I think you kind of already said it, and I just want to underline it. It's about taking the time. They didn't take the time to actually work with, and like, does that mean they didn't even test it with people who actually have black, very dark skin?
Right.
Like, or they were just like, oh, there, I'm sure it's fine.
We did it. That's good. We've checked the box, right? And like, that's, an issue when it comes to diversity things in general, right? And we've talked about this about good and bad diversity training and things like that. But like the idea of like, oh, well, we heard that we need better shades or whatever, or like a wider shade. So I'm just checking the box rather than really taking the time to change the culture around why are we increasing the shade range? What's this? Who is this for? What am I doing?
But also that's literally their only job.
Literally,
as a makeup company, their only job is to make this makeup that will look good on someone's skin.
Right.
Like that. That's the job.
That's the whole purpose. Which the communication then there is that a lot of these beauty companies are the ones setting the standards of what is and isn't beautiful. And so if you are excluding certain shades from your product line, then you are communicating effectively, intentionally or otherwise, effectively communicating that these shades are not beautiful, that you should not be these shades. You should use products in order to lighten your skin or change your skin in order to fit these shades. And that goes on both ends of the spectrum, right? Typically, there's a lot more lighter shades than there are darker shades, but we see that too. We see all the tanning products. Right, as I say, we see all the tanning products, but there's also a lot of lightening products too.
Cause cancer.
Right.
And sitting in there just getting irradiated to become a darker color.
Right. Yeah, it is really interesting to see how things have shifted from what, like, whether it's really, really light skin as beautiful. So it's like, it feels like in some ways, either end of the spectrum, you can never quite hit the mark. Either you're too dark or you're too light. If you're too light, you need to darken your skin. If you're too dark, then you need to lighten your skin. And like, you're getting these contradictory messages all the time.
Eric Roman just shared that there's a TV show called Catfish that has so many beautiful dark-skinned women who catfish people using lighter-skinned women's photos. Yep. I can definitely believe it. Yep. Also, just thinking of social media as a problem in this arena in general, like filters that people use. I've seen so many like memes where it's like someone with a filter and they look like this, very skinny, whatever, done up model. And then you look at them without the filter. And this is kind of rude, actually. It's, oh, look how ugly they actually are, which in and of itself is problematic. But it's also like, well, what we're seeing on social media, how much of it has been altered. And
well, again, it impacts everybody, but it's really impacting particularly our youth and younger folks. We're seeing a huge influx of body image issues because they're used to seeing people on social media with doctored images. And we're seeing kids younger and younger, particularly femme-presenting kids, but not just femme-presenting folks, but youth that are now using so many beauty products and like skincare routines and things like that. Not that there's something wrong with a child or a youth wanting to like have a skincare routine, but a lot of the products are for older folks, for things for elasticity in the skin. And now we're seeing kids that are using it that's actually causing problems or could cause heightened a faster aging process to their skin because they're using products that aren't made for them, but they're feeling driven to use them because of the images that they see all the time. And so we're even seeing kids and teenagers, young adults going to plastic surgery. Well, plastic surgery is on the rise as it continues to be, but where they bring in pictures of either themselves or other people with a filter on, asking for those images, for that to be what they're trying for. But those things really enhance our sense of insecurity because of this unrealistic, not real filters and things, and thinking like, oh, I would look so much prettier. I would look so much better if I look like this.
To flip it for a moment, we've talked a lot about women and femme presenting people, as you said. There's also a masculine presenting folks side of this with things like fitness, steroids, bulking up. I mean, it's a huge arena. There are also filters for that make guys look more bulky and big. But then misuse of like taking steroids and hormones and that stuff, let me tell you, it fudges you up because if you start taking things like testosterone, human growth hormone, those are called what we would call exogenous hormones. So something that's being put from outside your body into your body. It messes up the balance with your endogenous hormones, the hormones and hormone regulatory things that your body naturally has in balance. And so like if you take testosterone exogenously, so from the outside, if a man does that and he doesn't actually need it, or even when he does need it, your body stops producing testosterone because it interrupts that whole cycle. So this is something I know from I mentioned in an earlier episode, I had cancer. It was testicular cancer, and so I only have one testicle, but it actually produces enough testosterone for me, which is pretty normal. Your one gland can take over for the other one. And I just had an endocrinology appointment where my doctor was talking me through this, and it matched what I knew from the kind of human behavior and hormone research literature. If I were to go on testosterone, which I don't need to, my testicle would stop making it. And this is happening to guys. And then once they're taking this testosterone, which they often get illegally, or from sources where they really shouldn't, they then have to be on it for the rest of their lives because their own body will stop producing it. And so this kind of desire to be huge muscles, hyper masculine, again, just like the desire to be thin or doing things to the skin, like you were talking about, creates serious health problems.
Absolutely. And again, I do think that I think that we're seeing a shift in one, body, I said earlier, body positivity, but we are seeing a move, or at least, and perhaps this is a bias of mine just because of who I follow and what kind of media and things that I consume. But we are seeing a shift in folks in our culture currently to where there's a lot more range of styles and body types and presentations, from not needing to be hyper masculine or hyper feminine. Like, not that those things aren't still in existence, but that there can be a lot more. There's a lot more like androgynous clothing, or things that are like non-gendered clothing. It's all gendered clothing and things like that we're seeing a lot more folks, a lot more men wearing skirts and more feminine things, and women, wearing a little bit more masculine things. And so I think we're seeing some of that shift, and it exists. We're seeing a lot more male beauty influencers, like wearing makeup, folks wearing makeup just for the sake of wearing it, painting their nails. I mean, and I know I talk about my brother all the time because I love him and he's my best friend. Love you, Gigi. But yeah, so I know I talk about my brother a lot, but he is a fairly masculine person, but he paints his nails, and so we're seeing some of these things as becoming more and more acceptable, or more part of a range of how folks are presenting, which I think is really a beautiful move. And I think that I think it's just really interesting to see how things evolve and shift and change over time too.
You might say it's nice to see the diverse joy that people have with their self-expression.
That there's so much more variability, and there's a lot more acceptance for various ways of presenting or expressing oneself.
I think you're right that it's out there. But I do want to just reiterate what you said, that part of it is what you subscribe to and how it's curated for you. Because I think a lot of those people who break out of kind of traditional expression norms do face a lot of prejudice.
For sure.
And bias.
Yeah.
But I think, the more of us who are willing to break out of those boxes, the more accepted it's going to become.
Yeah. And again, I think the reason I say that is because I see folks like my brother, who is much more traditional and much more
he's straight.
And he's straight, and he's cishet, Black masculine man in a fairly masculine industry as a business person and working for a really big international company, where he also again wears his nails painted, and that there are other folks in his area that do something similar. And so that's why that barometer for me is like, and I'm seeing this, and it's not something that he gets a lot of, at least as far as I know, that he gets like backlash for or anything, that he sees other people doing some things similar. And so I do think that there is some of that shifting and changing, which I think is beautiful. But we also see that in other things too around beauty standards, where we talked about Afrocentric features. And now we're seeing things like BBLs on the rise, right? Like people wanting Brazilian butt lifts and like getting a yacht.
Okay, so one of Amber's students taught her this term that she taught to GYAT. Gat. Get your
girl that ass thick.
Girl, your butt is thick.
Yes. So it's a very like Gen Z term. So if we're using it incorrectly, but that's what it stands for. It's a big booty. So we're even seeing those things which have historically been really associated with kind of Afrocentric features, that's a very popular body modification that people are moving towards now.
Which, I remember just sitcoms from 90s and early 2000s where white ladies, like one of the things was if they had a big butt, that was considered an insult.
Right.
Like there was a Will and Grace episode where the character Grace, she doesn't want to pay for a personal trainer. So she kind of spies on this other woman who has a personal trainer, just does whatever the trainer's making her do. Yeah. And then the big joke was that woman was trying to get like a bigger butt. And then like it was one of those things where the joke was just obvious to viewers because of cultural context.
Right.
Like, obviously Grace didn't want
a big butt. Yeah.
Like, and it was weird that the other woman wanted that.
Right.
And
I mean, you used to hear like, oh, does this make my butt look big? Right. That's it. Does this make me look big? Does this make me look fat? Does this make my butt look big? Yeah. And now we're moving towards this like beauty standard and I think that, not to give all the credit to Kim Kardashian or the Kardashians, but them being ones that really kind of started to usher in some of that new
for the big
beauty
butts,
standards.
Okay, but not for getting women to spend less on makeup for sure.
Oh well, no, but again, beauty standards, right? Like what somebody's supposed to look like, this really teeny tiny waist and a big butt, and what color, like the tone of your skin, the tan skin. And what kind of makeup you're supposed to, what colors, and this new kind of this pushing the nude and like all the nude colors, not nudity, although there was that too. But but yeah, I think that there was this move, and we have folks who are non-traditionally having those features now pushing that as part of our beauty standard.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to take a little break, and then we will have some story time and questions and skills, all the other cool stuff. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Yes. So I know we've been talking about a lot.
Lots of things.
Now, and we barely scratched the surface.
My gosh, there's so much to talk about.
But I want you to just kind of think about, what you consider beautiful, why that is, and be open to different ways of conceiving of that idea, I think.
Well, and also, again, thinking about bias, but like, are there times that I let things go more, or I over highlight certain things because of who I think is or isn't attractive, or does it impact how competent I perceive someone to be?
Or if someone's maybe a bit less attractive to you, do you get more annoyed with them more easily or dismiss what they say more?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. The think ahead skill, which we had in a previous episode, which we'll probably revisit in some future episode, is a good way to think about. Think ahead about what's important, what you want to look for in an argument with someone.
Right.
Argument meaning a point they're trying to make, like
right.
when you're considering what they have to say. Because if you thought ahead about those kinds of things, focusing on their words rather than their looks,
right.
and so on, that's one way to prevent bias.
Absolutely.
All right, but we're going to get into story time. I guess it's me.
It's your story time
my
today.
Story time.
Yeah.
So first one, like many of the stories, comes from just a person who was in one of my trainings and then shared this kind of incident of bias. So this person worked in HR at a big company. And there was a husband and a wife that both worked at the company in different departments. That everyone knew, Mr. So-and-so and Mrs. So-and-so were married. And the woman got a big promotion. So she'd been working really hard and had accomplished a few big things in her department and was getting a big promotion, which was going to come with a big raise.
Right.
Which culmination of a lot of work, really great, good for her. And the boss kind of came to HR and asked for a file, one of the employee files, but it was for the husband. He was like, give me Mr. So-and-so's file. And the HR person, I was like, I think you mean Mrs. So-and-so. She's the one that we're
right.
putting up for this promotion,
right.
blah, blah, blah. And he was like, no, give me Mr. So-and-so's file. And HR was like, why would you need his file? Like,
right.
this isn't making sense.
No.
And the boss was like, well, I'm figuring out how big her raise is going to be, and I need to make sure she doesn't end up making more than her husband.
That's so wild.
So they needed to know what the husband's salary was before they could, because they were going to keep hers lower because somehow that was right to them. So, sexism, gender bias, this idea that straight men have to be making more than their wives,
right? Or
that'll be emasculating or something. If not,
you mentioned this earlier. My gut reaction is like, how is that even legal? That can't be legal. Like, I mean, this is like such we talk about like the gender gap and like pay gap, right? All the time. To think that somebody or that some folks explicitly try to make sure that there's a distinction.
And the system they had was set up where HR would have had to get the file from him. But imagine if he just had access to it, like no one would have ever known that that's what happened, that she wouldn't have gotten the raise she deserved. So HR kind of like was like, really?
Yeah.
And like talked him through how inappropriate that was. So at least in this case, she was able to catch it. But
yes,
such a more negative story.
That is real unfortunate.
Yeah. More positive story. More related to our kind of earlier theme, kind of attractiveness bias. So this is a media example. So I've mentioned Star Trek before. I really enjoy Star Trek.
Just a few times.
But part of the idea behind it is imagining what is kind of the best possible future we can come up with. Like, how can humanity be better? And related to kind of attractiveness biases and things, there's a quote, and I was trying to find the exact wording, but I couldn't find it. But it's from Star Trek: The Next Generation. And there's an alien race that's kind of funny looking, kind of by our beauty standards, very kind of ugly or weird.
Right.
And one of the characters says that, one of the last great prejudices that humans really need to overcome is kind of a revulsion to things, to species, to people who kind of look strange to us. This kind of attractiveness notion that really that's something we need to kind of overcome, because what someone looks like really shouldn't matter for their value. And I think this has been a theme that Star Trek has done in several different shows. Most recently, so one of their recent shows, Star Trek Discovery, I think one of the main characters' arcs was really designed for this. There's a character named Saru, and he's a very funny looking alien, kind of like some people. We've mentioned that Eric Rowe and I listen to the Star Trek podcasts. The podcasters kind of make a lot of jokes about how kind of revolting this guy kind of looks just by nature of his species. But through the art of television, you start to get to know this character. You start to feel for him. You care for him. You learn about his history and his family and his loves. And he actually has kind of a romance story that develops in the later seasons. And like by the end, you can feel yourself having affection for this character who physically is kind of objectively fairly repulsive by any standard of human beauty.
Interesting.
And I think about it a lot, where it's like, wow, like, you know, how they could make me have kind of empathy and kind of feel for this character who physically is very funny looking.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's interesting too, because again, it ties to all the attractiveness stuff and things that we're talking about, but even just, you know, the value that we attribute to somebody based on what they look like or how we perceive them, the characteristics that we attribute to them, that somebody that's repulsive or something like that one being bad, and I'm even thinking about these other parts of the attractiveness discussion that, you know, somebody that's overweight or somebody that looks a certain way can't be sexy, but they can be cute maybe, or they can be this maybe.
The sassy best friend.
They can be the sassy best friend, but they're not going to be the leading person or the leading lady or whatever, or that they're just inherently aren't going to have those desirable qualities. And so, yeah, I think that Star Trek is right? That was one of those last things that we really need to get over. How do we start to see people without seeing them? Yeah. And it reminds me of the show Love is Blind, right? Where it's like based on the premise of like, can we just fall in love with somebody based on who they are and not what they look like?
I'm pretty sure I'm correct in this. Correct me if I'm wrong. And for listeners who might not know what it is, it's like a dating type show, but they make the people up as kind of like furries or monsters.
No. Nope. That is what's that one called?
Sexy Beast.
Sexy Beast.
Oh,
yes,
Sexy
that's
Beast.
Sexy Beast. No, Love is Blind, they're in like pods, so they talk to each other through a wall essentially, and they get a chance, they date multiple people over that, but the premise is, can you fall in love with somebody without like ever seeing them? And I mean, there's a fault in this show, which is that they always get a conventionally attractive people on the show.
It's kind of Cyrano de Bergerac, like that play where one of the main points is he's got a huge nose and isn't conventionally attractive, but he like woos the lady through by feeding the words to a more attractive guy who talks to his love.
Well, I mean,
the idea that just the words should be where love lives.
Right. Exactly. But you know, again, the fault in the show itself is that they always get mostly conventionally attractive people. Now, of course, everybody has different things that they're attracted to. So once they see them, but they've all
got tiny butts. They don't have that
right.
That the kids in Gen Z love these days.
Well, one of the things that happened in this last season was one of the women, she kind of spoiled the experiment in a lot of ways, because she said that her friends compared her to Megan Fox, that she looked like Megan Fox. And to be perfectly fair, she does have a lot of facial features and looks like Megan Fox, but that put this very specific image in this man's head. And when he saw her, he was clearly disappointed.
Oh no.
I mean, he tried to play it off that he wasn't, and that wasn't why they didn't end up working out, but it was very clear. And she clearly had a lot of insecurities about that. She shared that and was always kind of trying to get him to like validate her. And so there was a lot of things in it. But again, all of that to say this
not my kind of show, I think.
I mean, I love the drama. I'm not gonna lie. But you know, this idea, like, how do we move ourselves to this space where we can just get to know somebody for who they are and not for the outer appearance, and have these expectations of what somebody should look like in order for them to have value, for them to be loved, being worthy of being loved, to be worthy of being seen and understood and desired, right?
You know, we should go back in time a few months and do a whole episode on the power of analogy in the media to work on these
wait
things.
a minute.
All right, put that into our time travel itinerary.
Love it. I love
Yeah,
it.
no, look back at that episode
No.
from October of this or of last year now that it's
Yeah.
2025, but
2025.
October 2024,
Yep.
we talked about that. And I think this is, a nice callback to it.
Absolutely. So then, I mean, I think those are our stories, for this.
yeah.
But how about our skill? What is our
Question.
question?
Our
what's the
question, Amber. So, what is name bias, and what can you do about it? So it's kind of the cousin
question.
of some of this attractiveness kind of stuff. But you want to start us off, and then I have an example.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that name bias is really what somebody perceives or who somebody perceives when they see a name on paper. I mean, there's lots and lots of research around certain types of names being perceived a certain way, whether they're competent or not competent, or seen as a specific ethnic group. So more ethnic sounding names not being called back for jobs, or having difficulty getting or more feminine sounding names not getting job being called back for jobs and things like that. And I even saw this on, I think, The View once, talking about like, oh, well, if you have a name like this, then I wouldn't want to hire you. I wouldn't want to hire you just because of somebody's name, regardless of their qualifications or their competency level.
Yeah, and this is something that we've done, by we, I mean psychologists, bias researchers have done lots and lots of experiments related to this where, we have more African-American and Black sounding names. Like if someone were named Jarrell Jackson, anyone who hears that name immediately thinks, oh, that's a Black guy.
Right.
And we actually use that as the way we manipulate, perceived race to showcase the kind of race bias. And then that playing out in the real world. So there was a recent news article, or a few months ago, I guess. So there's this guy, Dwight Jackson. He'd been applying for a job at this hotel a few times with his real name and never got a call back, never got called in. He changed his name on a new submission that he sent to John Jabrowski, trying to make it a more white sounding name.
Right.
And then was very quickly asked to
sudden.
interview.
Yep.
And he's actually, suing them for discrimination now. But it's just, that's just one kind of real world example of a trend that we see again and again and again in the research literature.
Right.
Also, people with more kind of Asian names or Latin American names, people start making assumptions like, oh, they must not speak English very well.
Absolutely.
Maybe English is their second language.
Yeah.
And biases related to that. So then the second part of the question, what can you do about it? So there are lots of people who think they should change their names when they're applying for jobs, or apply just with like initials, like maybe if their last name doesn't really imply any ethnicity. And it's, I don't know, it's interesting.
Yeah, I think what do we do about it? I think is people not maybe doing more blind review of applications, right? Yes, that's the ultimate goal, right? Is for job reviewers to do blind reviews of their applications rather than it having to be on the person to mitigate that. And recognizing that not all systems are in a place where they're doing that work. So how can I maybe take some of that on if I feel like maybe that's something that I could be subject to? Yeah. Which is hard. But it also reminds me of this show called The Neighborhood. And it has Cedric the Entertainer and Max Greenfield. And this Max Greenfield, who was Schmidt in New Girl, if anybody watches New Girl.
We're going down a TV show.
I know. But it's a white family moving into a Black neighborhood. And his name is Dave Johnson. And his son's name is Grover Johnson. And his father's name is LaMarcus Johnson. And so his neighbors, Cedric the Entertainer, is a Black family. They're like, ooh, let's go meet the Johnsons, thinking that it's going to be this Black family. And it's not. It's this little white family, and just kind of what ensues from that. But just this assumption of who is going to be their neighbor just based on their names, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. So now the skill.
All
right. So the skill for this episode is called adopting a cumulative perspective on bias. And this is an especially important thing. So very often for some types of bias that we talk about, like early on, and I keep coming back to it, this kind of you guys example where I try to kind of change that in my language. Some people might have a reaction like, well, is that really that big of a deal for someone? And we tend to, especially when we're thinking about our own biases, we tend to have a more isolated perspective. We tend to see the pattern of our behavior. So for a white person, most of the time with most Black people a white person interacts with, they don't express bias the majority of the time. Right. In general, when we talk about bias on this show, in my training and so on, it's a game of probabilities. Like, we're all vulnerable to bias, but it's not saying that every type of bias is going to happen every time. It can happen.
Right.
But the difference is when you're looking at your own behavior, you have just so much more context to see how rare and isolated it is that you maybe say something racist or do something. It almost never happens.
Right.
But for the person who's on the receiving end of the bias, it's different. And so if we're talking about Black and white folks, like the way I started the example, white folks in the US outnumber Black folks by a large margin. And so even if most white people almost never express bias, that results in Black people experiencing bias all the time, constantly, because those rare instances from the white person's perspective end up being very frequent for the Black person. And so adopting a cumulative perspective is just understanding that each of those individual instances adds up to kind of a bigger impact for the person who's the target of bias.
Absolutely. Yeah, I also talk about it from a racial battle fatigue perspective, which is, whereas like day-to-day microaggressions pile on and pile on and pile on. And even if I can handle or manage or even contextualize somebody else and say, like, I'm sure that this is not something that happens all the time. Like, you do this all the time, but I get this a lot and it's wearing.
It's that again experience. Like, oh, this is happening again.
It's wearing or like death by 1,000 cuts, right? It's like a little cut. It's a paper cut, right? But if you keep getting a paper cut in the same spot over and over and over and over and over again, it hurts and it's cumulative and it starts to wear.
Yeah. And like one type of bias where I have found it useful to discuss this with folks is mixing up the names of someone. Right. So there's experience a lot of Black folks have, and folks of various races, but where someone will call them by the wrong name and nope, that was the other Black guy. There are two Black guys that work at this company and you call me by the name of the other one. Like, well, I mix other people's names up too. Like anyone who has siblings, I think in my family of 5 siblings, my parents call us all by different wrong names pretty much every time. But it's different contexts and it's how these things add up. So for a Black 100%. Person who's getting called the wrong name, it's a reminder that, oh, you see me as a Black person first and as myself second. And this is how our brains work. When you have to distinguish someone from the crowd of people and there's one or two people with darker skin, your brain is naturally going to categorize them together. It's going to create this sort of thing. But sometimes the people making the mistake are like, well, it's not that big a deal. You're mixing up a name. But again, how often does it happen to them specifically? And it's this reminder like, oh, you're seeing me as race first and person second.
I had that happen. I had it with one of my supervisees and he was totally, obviously unintentional. And he had only met this group of people one other time. And he was really trying to be intentional about remembering people's names and then called one of the Black students the other Black girl's name. And he got called out or somebody said that you really offended that person. And he was like, well, I've only met everybody one time, and we started talking about it and he was like, you're absolutely right. He's like, I just don't know how to, what do I do with this? It was totally unintentional. I was like, yes, it is unintentional. And it's still a microaggression. Even though you weren't trying to do that, here's how it was. And I was just so proud of him because he just sat and took it all in and he's like, you're right. It's not about me. it still impacted her in that way. And it was still a microaggression. It was still this like cumulative impact on them. And he was so intentional about going and apologizing and acknowledging like, hey, this is what happened. It was totally not my intent. And I see how that was harmful. Yeah. And I was
just in case any of our listeners hasn't heard that term, microaggression, it's essentially what I was calling a bias incident, an incident where you've done something, usually unintentionally, that can be seen as some kind of bias towards the person. Yep. And it's not just about race. I've been using race as the example, but gender, sexual, any kind of thing. All of those things, like another example I commonly use is, doctors who are women often get mistaken for nurses. Right. Because, and we know why that happens. Like actually most nurses are actually women. But, doctors actually are about 50% male, 50% female these days. Yep. And so some people sometimes say, well, is it really that big a deal? So you thought the doctor was a nurse? Well, one, how many times a day does that happen to women doctors? A lot. And it's a question like, oh, do you not think I'm competent enough? Or, or just it's just the wrong role. Like, but also in addition to the cumulative effect where this happening a lot adds up, you don't really necessarily know all the different ways it can cause a bigger harm than you realize. So one thing with doctors, so think about the last time you went to a doctor's appointment, like, and what the steps are. So first you have an appointment with kind of a nurse or a medical assistant, and they kind of get your information, and then later the doctor comes in, and then you get to meet with the doctor. Well, something that has many people report happens in some data are indicating is a problem for women doctors. People sometimes think their woman doctor is the nurse, and so they don't give them all the details because they're like, oh, I'm just gonna have to repeat all this when the doctor gets here. Right. So they, give the very surface level stuff, and they want to save their kind of private, intimate details for when the doctor's here, so they don't have to tell everyone their business. Interesting. And then they don't realize, oh, there's no one else coming, and so it makes the doctor's job harder. But also the patient.
Not getting the best care.
They're not getting the best care because they kind of had made this little quick mistake. So So that was a little bit of a tangent, but this fundamental idea of adopting a cumulative perspective on bias, recognizing that even if it's a very isolated, a very rare thing for you to express bias, for the person experiencing it, it's not rare. Right. It's not isolated. It accumulates. Or at least it might be the fifth time that day that someone said something like that to them, or whatever the time scale is. Right. And so it has a bigger impact than you might think it would have. So if adopting this cumulative perspective, understanding that these things add up to have a bigger impact, it actually goes a long way towards improving intergroup interactions. My colleague, Dr. Emily Dix, a huge, like, the primary subject of her research is this kind of core idea, and just helping people really bridge the gap between thinking of bias as very isolated versus understanding its cumulative impact just goes such a long way towards helping us all to work better on these things.
And acknowledging it, right? Like, even if you can acknowledge that, goes a really long way. Like, even if it's not, because it's not about, again, it's an others focus rather than a self focus. When we have a self focus, we're thinking this is isolated. It's not a trait of mine. It's an offhand thing, versus an others focus is saying, like, how can I focus on what their experience of me is, or of this thing is.
So adopting a cumulative perspective on bias. It's a skill we can all develop.
That's really good. I really like that terminology and thinking about it in that way.
Good. Awesome. All right. So now, as always, we wrap up with a joyful recommendation. It's that second piece of bread in our diverse joy sandwich.
Our diverse joy sandwich.
So, Amber, what you recommending for people this month?
So, I am recommending the show Never Say Never with Jeff Jenkins.
So who's Jeff Jenkins? I don't think I know who that is.
Jeff Jenkins, he's a social media person, travel blogger. Okay. He's a plus size travel blogger, and he now has a show. I think there's at least one season. It's streaming on Disney Plus. It's on National Geographic.
Oh, cool. Is he just because we're talking about these things? Is he white?
He's black. He's a plus size
big-bodied black man.
Yep, larger bodied black man, and he travels. And the whole premise of the show is, like, never say never. So, like, There are all of these travel experiences that a lot of plus size folks won't do. They'll never do because they think, well, I'm too fat for that. Like I can't skydive, or I can't do mountain climbing. I can't do any of these things. And
he's got, Eric Roman just pulled up a picture for us.
Yeah.
He's got, are those braids?
Dreadlocks. He's got dreadlocks. He's got locks. And he's just the most like positive person. He goes and travels all over the world. This is like, he did the
Sorry,
skyway.
Eric Roman's showing us more pictures.
He did this, like, I think it's called the sky with the heaven stairway or something like that. And so, I mean, he's gone all over the world and done these things that are not you don't typically see larger bodied folks do it. One, because we're not because we're scared of the activity itself, but that it's not going to accommodate our bodies, right? That we're not going to have a wetsuit that we can go diving in, or that there's going to be a life vest.
The people who set up the activity maybe weren't thinking about folks like big-bodied folks when they set it up.
Right, exactly. And so, or even accessing those things. Finding wetsuits or finding snowsuits that fit larger bodies is extremely difficult. So just going and showing up a lot of places where people will go do an adventure thing usually doesn't have things for us.
And to hear us talk even more about this, and I'm not cutting you off, Amber, I just check out our season 1 episode called Joy at Every Size, weight bias.
Right. Yeah.
We talk a lot more about that. And so it's a good callback to that too.
Absolutely.
Cool. This show sounds, so he's fun.
So good.
His smile is very infectious from the picture that Roman showed us.
The sweetest person. I just watch him and I'm like, I want to be friends.
Yay.
And he has this, social media and stuff. And so he's like I said, he's a travel blogger and social media person. So he still posts all his stuff, and he does like where you can win a trip with him and go and experience. And I'm like, I want to win a trip with Jeff Jenkins, but definitely go and watch his show. It's fantastic. And it's inspiring from a perspective of like, hey, this is accessible to everybody. And so for folks who think whether that's their size or their body, their height or whatever, that certain activities are not accessible to them, he really pushes and says like, hey, still try it. Like find ways that you don't cut your own self off from opportunities just because of whatever that thing you might think is a barrier.
Yeah. And, we talk about assumptions all the time. Right. You do have to consider whether your body will be able to do something, but don't let it be an assumption. Like find out.
Yeah.
Go test the assumption.
Right. Try it out. If it's something you want to do, try it and see what your body can do, or bring your own things if you need to, right? Like don't rely on like that the kayak company is going to have something that's going to work for you, but bring your own stuff. If that's something you want to do, try it. So
that sounds very inspiring.
It's really good. Yeah.
Maybe we can check it out together after we're done recording. Watch an episode. Awesome.
Yay.
All right. Well, I'm Dr. William Cox.
I'm Dr. Amber Nelson.
Diverse Joy is produced by Eric Roman Binding with music by Jay Arner. It is accessible as a video podcast on YouTube or an audio-only podcast wherever you get podcasts, or at diversejoy.com. Also follow us at Diverse Joy on most social media platforms. If you enjoy the show, help us reach more people by leaving 5-star reviews in your podcasting app, or liking it on YouTube, or recommend it personally to others. I can't overemphasize how much talking to other people and sharing with other people that you like a podcast is the #1 way we'll reach more people. Diverse Joy is the official podcast of Inequity Agents of Change, a nonprofit devoted to evidence-based approaches to reduce bias, create inclusion, and promote equity. All that good Jedi work. Learn more at biashabit.com. Thank you for joining us. Now, go find your joy.
Bye.
Bye.